Every second in the trenches of World War I could be the last for any soldier there. Random artillery shells, snipers, night raids, gas attacks, and many other clever traps and methods used by soldiers to destroy each other claimed a large number of lives daily. However, there were some roles that were even more horrifying than just being and fighting in the trenches. Prepare to hear some of the disturbing things that some people were forced to do, while others, either out of extreme bravery or sheer boredom, volunteered for them despite the immense risks. Let's begin. Number 1. Sentry. Sentries had one of the most dangerous yet essential roles on the front lines. Their task was to stand guard, monitor no man's land for any signs of suspicious activity, and alert others of incoming threats. They carried whistles with various signals and codes to communicate different dangers. For example, 3 whistles meant an attack from the right side, 2 from the left, and 1 from the front. This system enabled other soldiers to immediately know what to do. They were positioned at observation posts, often closest to the enemy line, or at key locations within the trench system. They also had their special shallow trenches dug a few meters in front of the main trench line. From here, the sentries would listen and covertly observe no man's land, ensuring there were no surprises for the soldiers in the front trench. Just imagine, you are alone, in the middle of the night, just a few dozen meters from the enemy. You know you are the first target of an attack. And that the enemy might already be approaching you under cover of darkness, to silently kill you, without giving you a chance to call for help or alert anyone. As both sides employed sentries, they understood that any offensive action against enemy trenches had to first neutralize these watchful guards to prevent them from alerting the rest of the soldiers. A small group of trench raiders would typically approach at night, often just before dawn, when it is hardest to stay awake and fatigue peaks. They camouflaged their faces with coal or mud to blend into the environment, especially when flares were fired and lit up the battlefield. Then, they would crawl slowly across no man's land in absolute silence. The preferred method for eliminating a sentry was always the quickest and quietest, using knives, trench clubs, or even bare hands to silence the sentry as stealthily as possible. One raider might cover the sentry's mouth, while another swiftly neutralized him. On the other hand, sentries had to maintain high vigilance during their shifts, which typically lasted an hour or two, but sometimes extended due to a lack of manpower. They had to continuously watch and listen towards the enemy trenches and no man's land, often through periscopes or protected metal slits to shield themselves from snipers. Staring long into the night under such tense conditions, the human brain can begin to hallucinate and struggle to distinguish reality from illusions. Sentries often thought they saw enemy movements or even dreamed of an attack, leading to false alarms. One tactic used to verify movement in the dark was to not look directly at it, but to casually pass their eyes from left to right a few times. It still appeared that something was moving when they scanned that area, then it was likely that something was there. The psychological strain on sentries was immense. The constant state of high alert and the isolation of their posts led to intense stress and anxiety. Imagine the fear of not knowing when an attack might occur, coupled with the reality that you are the first target in such a brutal way. Moreover, because the entire front depended on the vigilance of sentries, if a sentry fell asleep or was found drunk on duty, they would face severe punishment or even execution. Number 2. Runner. You might wonder why human lives were risked to deliver messages, especially in an era of telephones and the emergence of early radios. This was because, at the time, telephones were connected by copper wires, which were often severed by artillery barrages, and radio channels could easily be intercepted by the enemy, thus compromising the message. Pigeons and dogs were also used, but only a human could deliver urgent and sensitive messages quickly and efficiently. Thus, runners were created. These soldiers, identified by a red band around their left arm, were armed only with a sidearm, usually a pistol, a gas mask, and a light backpack to be as light and fast as possible. They had to be physically fit, with excellent stamina to quickly traverse battlefields filled with mud and obstacles. Not to mention that all this happened under constant gunfire, artillery fire, and gas attacks. Urgent messages at critical moments could turn the tide of battle and be the difference between life and death and the success of the entire operation. They also had to be skilled map readers, and were often responsible for guiding troops into new areas of the battlefield. A good memory was also an advantage, to memorize messages should they be lost, or too sensitive to write down. Knowing their role, runners were a primary target for the enemy during battles. If they could kill or even capture a runner, they would gain an advantage over the enemy by interrupting their communications or intercepting messages. The risk to a runner's life was so great that messages were often sent with 2 or 3 carriers on different routes to ensure at least one reached its destination. As one veteran described the job, it was merely a question of how long he would last before being wounded or killed. However, despite the enormous risks and the dreadful nature of the job, soldiers often volunteered for it. Being a runner was extremely brave, and they were respected by other soldiers. There were also those who applied for the job out of boredom and the monotony of static warfare. But all in all, being a runner was a terrifying and very deadly role. Number 3. Tank crews. When tanks first appeared during the Battle of the Somme, they caused panic and fear among the enemy, who saw these massive metal beasts slowly crossing no man's land, crushing everything in their path, and firing from their cannons and machine guns. However, behind the facade of this seemingly indestructible machine was an absolute nightmare for the crews of the first tanks, who were exposed to horrors every second. These early tanks were incredibly dangerous for their crews. Any comfort for the crew was not considered during their construction, so in one space there was the crew, usually 8 people, but along with them, the engine, ammunition, and weapons. The interior was filled with engine vapors, hot air, and communication was impossible without shouting into each other's ears at the top of their lungs. Also, the crew had to wear primitive gas masks due to the toxic engine gases, as well as improvised helmets for protection from spalling. The earliest tanks had thin armor, and even regular rifle rounds could penetrate through leaks in the armor. Even non-penetrating hits could dislodge metal shards from the tank's inner walls, sending them flying at great speed into the soldiers' faces. After the initial shock following the first appearance of tanks, the enemy soon found ways to counter them. Initially, improvised reverse bullets were used, with added gunpowder and turned upside down to increase their penetrative power, and after that, special tungsten K bullets appeared which could penetrate the armor of the first tanks. Anti-tank rifles were soon introduced, which easily penetrated the initial armor of World War I. When a bullet penetrated the armor, it would continue to ricochet inside the tank, creating a massacre and even causing explosions or fires. Of course, there was also the constant danger of breakdowns, or getting stuck in the mud, or obstacles of no man's land, leaving the crew as easy targets for enemy artillery. Even today, in modern times, being a tanker is an extremely demanding and difficult job, and these first tankers endured the unbearable. Number 4. Submarine crews. Perhaps the only thing worse for the crew than the primitive, still experimental technology of the World War I tank is when that tank is deep beneath the surface of the ocean. Thus, World War I saw the first significant use of submarines in warfare, and their crews faced extraordinary challenges and horrors. Life as a submariner during World War I was fraught with danger and discomfort, making it one of the most terrifying roles in the war. Submarines of that era were primitive by today's standards, and the conditions on board were harsh and often deadly. Submariners were crammed into tiny, overcrowded spaces filled with the constant stench of diesel, old sweat, and mold. There was no fresh air when submerged, and toxic fumes from the batteries and engines could fill the cramped interior. The early submarines had no way to purify the air or recycle oxygen, so oxygen levels would drop alarmingly during longer dives, leading to suffocation risks. Water constantly leaked, adding to the general discomfort and sense of dread. Once submerged, communication with the outside world was cut off, isolating the crew completely. There were also significant operational hazards. Submarines had limited battery life and could not stay submerged for long. They had to surface frequently to recharge batteries using diesel engines, exposing them to enemy detection and attack. The submarines were slow and lacked deep dive capabilities, making them easy targets for enemy ships and aircraft. Furthermore, the early torpedoes used by these submarines were notoriously unreliable and could even backfire, posing an immense risk to the crew itself. Many submariners faced the grim reality of torpedoes malfunctioning or failing to fire correctly. Some would hit enemy ships and not explode, while others could even circle back to the submarine and destroy it. The casualty rates were staggering, Germans lost 75% of their submarines and crews. Life on these early submarines was truly nasty and horrifically short. These are just some of the extremely dangerous jobs of World War I, though there were others. And generally, all roles in war are risky. In the next video, if you are interested, we will describe some lesser-known, yet extraordinarily disturbing and deadly roles in the armies of World War I.